right, we will hit the ground running. We'll probably keep admitting people as we go here. And multitask away. All right. Well, this is, it's always great to talk about nonpartisanship. Certainly our top questions we get are related to nonpartisanship. It's always good to review it. And I am going to share a resource that is always on our website today. LWVUS did a great PowerPoint back in 2021. And that is under member resources on our website. It is great. It is a great resource. We're going to talk a little bit about how we've used that guidance as well, and where we have some specific guidance on nonpartisanship related to both advocacy and voting. But this is the kind of issue where there are always gray areas, right? So that is what makes this discussion challenging. I know for everybody, there's some clarity, like we're very clear that nonpartisan to us means we do not endorse parties and we do not endorse candidates. But as we know, it becomes really difficult in the times we're in where we do endorse issues, right? We study and take action on issues. We have a lot of powerful things to say about issues. And in these days that we're in, the parties have seemed to align along our issues. They're either for our issues or against our issues. So I think of it, one construct I always think of before we kind of get into the minutia and how I think of nonpartisanship is I always remind myself when I'm sending out something, I'm like, am I endorsing a candidate? Am I endorsing a party? No. And then I think, am I endorsing an issue? Yes. But it is true, like, let's say something about the election being fair and, looking at our whole reality of where we sit, talking about the fact that the 2020 elections were fair and accurate is not a partisan statement. It feels partisan because the parties themselves have aligned around certain issues. But if you kind of put this little hat on when you're trying to think about it, think in those terms. What are we doing? Are we aligning on a candidate or a party or an issue? And those three things really kind of provide a safety valve. So we're going to kind of use that lens today as we walk through, again, the specific guidance from LWVUS, as well as the things that we've put on our website around advocacy and voter service. So that being said, during the session, for sure, we want to answer your questions. I will say every time I feel like we have a handle on this, somebody asks something new that was like, oh, now that is interesting. So that's why we have to keep learning and talking and growing. Please put any questions you have in the chat. If you raise your hand using the official raise hand, little guy on your Zoom, I can see it when I'm sharing my screen, but I can't see all of you while I'm sharing my screen. So if you can use those two formats while I'm screen sharing, then I can be sure to get you, okay? All right, so we're gonna jump into the PowerPoint here. And let's pull it up, all right. Okay, first of all, this is our website, and I do want to remind you all again that on our website, when just about, I would say 98% of any question you want to answer, you are going to find an answer under member resources. We have so many things there, and one of the things we do have as you scroll on down, and I know many of you have seen this many times throughout, but in our league admin section is where so many of these things are. And again, under DEI, we have DEI values and we have nonpartisanship. So it is this nonpartisanship PowerPoint that we are talking about today for the most part of our time together. And I'll show you some other links as we go along. But they did such a good job. I'm all about sharing, right? So here we go. So as we know, remaining nonpartisan in hyperpartisan times is a challenge. So these are great, fabulous people. All of these wonderful people are still at the National League. I think we lost Alma, didn't we? But all the rest of them are still there doing their great work. We all have a policy and we all abide by this policy, right? We are proud to be nonpartisan, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties at any level of government, but always working on vital issues of concern to members and the public. And what I want to say right there, I'm just going to try whenever we look at some of these to give some practical insights. We say supporting and endorsing, but it's also opposing. So we get a lot of questions about indivisible. For example, people often wonder about, can we partner with indivisible? What about indivisible? Indivisible was groups like indivisible, or especially like the Women's March. If a group is forming in opposition and their group is to be opposed to a candidate, that is still a partisan statement. So indivisible, I know has broadened their reach. They started out against Trump originally. The Women's Marches clearly started out as well. Some of the individual chapters have organized around a 501c3 platform and are no longer necessarily endorsing candidates. But we do need to think about that opposition too. So groups, when we're looking to partner or we're looking at our actions, we can oppose candidates' issues. We can oppose issues, right? We are opposed to so many things. We're opposed to systemic racism or whatever it was, but we support so many issues, but it's the candidates and the parties. So again, if at any level of government, we're not supporting or opposing candidates. Now, the other big part of that is the word candidate. So, for example, during the Walz administration, we were very active in climate change, and we supported an effort called the Walz Climate Report Card. It was a way of all of us involved in climate change to sort of give Governor Walz a grade in different areas of climate change. And I got a lot of feedback from League members who said that is a violation of our nonpartisan policy. And I'm like, no, because people think about our current elected officials sometimes as candidates, but people are officials and then they are candidates. And those are two separate things, as a reminder. So candidates, this is why during this time, after June, when people file for office and become a candidate, we do treat people differently. When they're in office, we do lobby on issues. We oppose government officials' points of view on things all the time. We support government officials' views on their issues all the time. But when they are candidates, this is when our nonpartisan policy really resonates. So this is an issue also right now, often with regards to Secretary Simon. A lot of leagues have Secretary Simon, Office of the Secretary of State, out throughout the years to come and speak on elections. A great thing to do. But when he filed for office in June, he became a candidate. And now we sort of think of it like we have a blackout period. We no longer want to invite Secretary Simon to our events, which doesn't mean we can't get input from his office. There are so many great people, David and Peter, we know all kinds of wonderful people that can speak to you on the issues, but not Secretary Simon. So if you want to think of some keywords, the thing is this notion of this distinction again, and it all is in this policy, but to bring that policy to life, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties at any level of government. But again, always working on vital issues of concern to members in the public. So we still are working on the issues. Sometimes people feel like we're giving up our issues when we're not being oppositional or in support of candidates. And I would say it's the reverse. We're standing strong on our issues by acknowledging what our democracy, the roles we play in our democracy. As you know, with the League of Women Voters too, our reputation is still very strong in terms of being able to do candidate forums, to offer voter education, and to register any voter at all, regardless of their point of view. And that is something we are very proud of. It actually is also something that any 501c3 is supposed to agree to. So that's another thing to understand, that all people who are 501c3 nonprofit organizations providing tax deduction to donors are all supposed to be in the same space, not supporting candidates or partners or parties. We see a lot of people violating that, frankly, from time to time. But so it's not unique to the League. We probably take an extra hard edge to it. But, and I will say this, one of our groups tried to do an event with Secretary Simon. One of our leagues was trying to do an event where Secretary Simon was going to be there at the library, and the library said, no, you can't, because we have a blackout period. Secretary Simon is a candidate, and if he appears at any library, he has to be there with the other candidate. So they got it. That's the message. If you're going to have anyone who's a candidate at anything, you want them together with the other candidates, as we do with candidate forums. So that's a lot, but I think so much is in this. If we really take the policy apart, I hope you can see this. And we're going to keep noodling through, but I want to throw that out there. Okay. All right. So let's keep on going. Any big questions as we keep going? Okay. So nonpartisan, again, does not mean non-political. And we talked about the definition of nonpartisan. Issues are not partisan. Democracy is not partisan. Facts are not partisan. We lean into what is good for voters. Now, I will share with you another practical real world thing. We opened up our new elections 411 webpage, which is all about the facts and proclaiming that we know the elections of 2020 were fair and accurate. And we list all kinds of sources for that across the political spectrum. So we have a lot of candidates right now who are running, who don't believe the same things we do. But we also have candidates right now who are running who are opposed to abortion. The League of Women Voters, we are pro-choice. That is an issue of ours. So our election, the fact that we have people who are running, who deny the elections, who deny the facts about the elections, is frustrating. It's difficult, right? But we always have candidates who are running who do not agree with all the issues of the League. So we can still promote our issues on our website, but we also, and sometimes they just feel more intense, right? Than when we're in the middle of these campaigns, and it feels tougher, but it is something we do all the time, is that piece of and again, what the bonus here is the only way we know that the way people vote because they know the issues, they vote because they know the candidates, and they know what they want their vote to stand for. And that's what's so powerful about what we can do as League. We can help people get information about who the candidates are and where they stand on the issues, because that's when people vote. So we might like to tell all the candidates what they should vote for, but that isn't the role, right? And it's a powerful role because so few people take it really anymore, and they look to us to provide that. So we do want to lean into LWV positions. We can talk about positions. We do want to state what it means to be nonpartisan, but we don't agree with or oppose candidates or parties. And again, building into what I said before, candidates are different from elected officials. Timing matters here. So that's a big piece of takeaway, and something I think we at the State League want to help all our leagues remember is it's sort of like, like the blackout period for a football game. If enough people don't come to the game, you're not going to see it. We have a blackout period when we need to be more careful than others. Yeah, so Paul, you missed the opening there. Sorry. All of these slides on nonpartisanship are accessible to everybody, and they're all right now today on our member resources page, and we will link to that again at the end. They're also in our member handbook, on our I think in our voter guide, but they are under league admin on our member resources page. So, and we want you to use this. This is a great thing for any of you who are leaders in your local leagues to get these slides and these messages out. You can also take it apart and slice and dice it. So Judy's asking, how do you think about elected officials who have endorsed a candidate? I mean, again, candidates are candidates. I mean, whether if an elected official, if somebody is elected and they're not running for an office, right, but they're endorsing someone else, it's not something we normally comment on anyway. We don't tell people who to vote for, and we don't tell people who not to vote for. So, so I don't know, Judy, if you want to open up and ask more about that, but if that makes sense. So this is a big important part here, is timing matters, and people are candidates for most statewide and all the statewide and US offices. Those are in June when people declare their candidacy. Our local school boards and cities, unless they were in primaries, usually declare in late August. So there's a shorter period of time for them campaigning. Yeah, Judy.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. Yeah, I was wondering about, so, if it's someone who's elected, not running for office, but have endorsed a number of candidates who are, should we be careful about even being involved in events with them, or that's not a concern?
Yeah, I mean, I think I see what you're saying. So Judy is saying, let's say this year everyone's running, so it's a little harder other than the two senators, right? So pretty easy this year.
Mayor Fry isn't running, and he's endorsing a lot of candidates.
Okay, so Mayor Fry is not running, and he is endorsing a lot of candidates. And I would say during the candidate season, I would just avoid any events with people who are endorsing candidates.
Okay.
Yes. And I think it's a great question, Judy. See, there's always another little wrinkle, right? We say that about partners. I never thought about it in terms of the elected officials themselves. But another example would be a lot of our local leagues do candidate forums with chambers of commerce. Some chambers of commerce endorse, others don't. If you are endorsing, then no. And I think it's kind of the clear picture. Like if you step back and look at it, is there a conflict of interest here if I'm with this person? It's like having yard signs. I mean, if you're running voter service and you have a yard sign for someone you're doing a candidate forum for, that's not a good idea, right? So we want to, if you kind of put change your hats around and take a look at it, you can see it a little clearly. But that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up, Judy. I would say, sort of by IRS standards, certain things might be more kosher than they are when they are, but for the league, where we're trying, because we're doing candidate forums and we're really trying to raise our bar, right, around how we maintain our reputation around nonpartisanship. Okay, so the attacks, when and how to push back and when not to. And this is like my hardest thing, so I'll talk about. So when, where the mischaracterizations about issues come from, you want to look at the media, politicians, social media. Well, I'll run through this and I'll give some examples. How to counter the claims, and what to ignore. So a lot of times, when we see things that we feel are just like I'll get why is the league not making a stand on this? Why are we not talking about this? There's so many things we'd love to amplify, but what we're learning so much on so many levels is that, for example, when you have Twitter and you have all the social media, anytime you add a comment to something that is incorrect or egregious, you're allowing it to keep going, right? So a lot of times the advice is you let things drop, because are you really even going to win on that, right? So that's where I think it becomes difficult when we're talking, especially within politicians. Now, but from the media itself, what we've often said is that, and how they say this, how to counter the claims, leaning on policy and longevity, letters to the editor, corrections. Correcting facts is still a great thing, right? So we might see something, and that's what we've done when we talk about the work we've done on election misinformation. We give factual information. While I'd like to say, and in my dreams, I'm saying, we're being like, this is crazy, that's not what we say publicly or what we do, right? The point is, there you are with your misinformation, and we're saying, here's the correct information based on the audits done by voting, based on the studies done. So we push back with facts and then I would say the truth, right? We often talk about facts because the truth, people have different views of the truth, right? But having multiple facts from across political spectrums, that's where we look at it. And one of the things we've said to county commissioners who are being bombarded by the Minnesota Patriots group, for example, their source is one person's study, right? One person's look. We're like, what about across the political spectrum? Look at all these facts, look at all these sources, trust your audits. So all of this is to say, there's certain things that we just let go, even though they seem egregious, because you kind of have to think, what's the bottom line here? But other things we do push back with facts. And that's really, again, I think our strong suit, and why we, for example, on election misinformation, we started our elections 411 page so that all of that information is there. And it can be a powerful pushback. Nonpartisan league messaging sources. I will say, and when we get to the end here, I'll bring us on to the league management site again. They do a wonderful job. LWVUS does a great job of monitoring, giving us these good talking points, and we try to elevate their points of view often as well. So they're also a really good source. Okay, so nonpartisanship on social media. Well, this is what we were saying, that the don't feed the trolls is a good message for what we were talking about. What you like is visible, not just what you post. So when you are liking, like let's say you are, let me get into the harder weeds here. So let's say I'm going to take, let's just take Scott Jensen, okay, running for governor, right? So Scott Jensen's posts something, and I am the executive director of the League of Women Voters, and I go on and dislike that. Those are things we don't want to do. When people are candidates, we don't want to be liking or disliking their comments either. And we've had issues with that before. It's tough because people are like, well, I just liked it, I didn't share it. But anything you do on social media is visible. That's the bottom line. So you always think, do I want this act I'm about to take to be something, is it clear what I mean here? And I think the hardest part for me, I often feel like we can't let that comment stand. It's horrible. We need to respond. And but the don't feed the trolls idea is really on social media. It doesn't mean we don't respond at all. It means, again, we could say, here is our, like on election misinformation, we can say, here is our point of view on the elections and why we know they're fair and accurate. So some of it is timing and some of it is strategy. It's how you share information. You don't how you share it in a way where you're just, again, letting the facts be known versus trying to tell somebody else their point of view is misguided. Does that make sense? Let me see in the chat. Yeah. So when are we acting as LWV members and when are we acting personally, which is great. And let's just talk about that. I think it comes up later, but it's a very good point. I think social media is the toughest part for us as league members because we all have, what I always say is we're all voters first. We all are going to make a partisan decision because that's what happens on voting day. We're all going to do that and we all get to be the individuals we want. But what we often say, again, is that you really want to consider who you are. So I, as the executive director of the League Women Voters, the state of Minnesota, I don't talk about politics on my social media site at all. I mean, it's just, why do I need to? I don't need to. If I really need to vent about something, I've got a back porch and I invite some friends over. Sometimes I just tell people, don't think you're that much of yourselves that you have to have your opinion out there for the world to see. I mean, you want to think of it. I think that expressing your point of view on issues is always good and okay. And that's how I ask you to think about it as league members. I do post on issues. I do say I am supportive of, but I don't say I'm supportive of this issue. I do talk about election integrity or, facts and all the good information. When there's a new New York Post or, when the conservative case for why the elections are fair and accurate, Senator Danforth came out, I put that on my social media site. I'm happy to have that be there. Again, it's issue related. Keep the candidate information out of it. That's the real thing to think about. Don't touch those candidates. Let them mess up or make their own story or mess up their own story of their own. But we want to provide the venue for candidates, the venue for people to learn about the candidates. We don't want to be talking about that. So we really ask you to think about that. This is more for people who are more professional in social media. Again, just like you're saying, personal accounts can be found and used against you. And we really want an opportunity for people to express your view. I am not a fan of, this is one thing we've said, these views represented here do not reflect those of LWV. I think that's certainly fine for anyone to include. But I think if you're playing any leadership role in the league, it's best to just leave those points of view, off the table when they're going to be a problem. Paul.
Yeah, Michelle, one thing I just wanted to offer, because it's come up, is being thoughtful about what posts that we reshare. We talked about what we like, what we do the frowny face on, but being careful, because we've had that at the state level. We've talked about if a source is particularly partisan or is widely seen as extreme at one end or the other, then that's generally not advisable to promote or share, because that's not going to be impartial, nonpartisan kind of information.
Right. Great point. Thanks, Paul. So sharing, liking, clicking, all of those things. So now let's say Amy Klobuchar is excited about the new big bill that was signed, right? And Amy's talking as a senator and saying, this is so great. We got this great bill passed, and it's a bill that we support or that you support, even just personally. Amy's not a candidate right now. And I think it's fine to share that. I think government officials talking about work they've done or work they are a part of when they're not a candidate, it's more okay to share that. It's not to never share anything because someone's a Democrat or a Republican, but it is that candidate piece that we're especially mindful. And to Paul's point, ongoingly all year long, we try to not share things where a candidate or a party is being especially opinionated about or against another party, because then it becomes that sort of endorsement kind of back door. Okay, so here's a question. Michelle, you said to leave candidates out, but are we allowed to follow candidates' social media for informational purposes as long as we're not engaging with them? Would you recommend we do it for all candidates in a race whom we can find on a platform? Absolutely. You can follow and look at people. You are a voter. And again, that is getting information. Let the information flow in. We always want information flowing to us. As voters, as league members, take it in, follow it. I think following is fine. It's a great question, because following, you think someone could say, well, you're following. I think it's less obvious that someone could make a case. I mean, I follow things I don't agree with and people I don't agree with, because I want to see what they have to say. And I think it would be less difficult to make an argument that you're for or against something based on following it, because people follow things for oppositional research as well. So I think that that's a great question. I think following is okay, and that would be your construct is, yes, we're always wanting to learn what everybody has to say. Okay, being political but not partisan on social advocacy. Boy, the people, you're all just looking ahead here. This is good. It's okay to retweet politicians when their tweets align with our advocacy. So again, like I was giving the Amy Klobuchar example, we love the new climate change bill. That's our advocacy. Yay. Have your own political opinions, but be careful if they differ from LWV's positions. So let's say you don't agree with everything about LWV, which not everybody does, not right? Like any organization, not everyone is going to agree on every position we have. But especially if you're in leadership positions, it's just all social media. The real construct is, what I ask everyone to do is, first of all, decide, is it going to make a difference am I going to make a difference in the world if I share my point of view on something? Where does it fit in? We ask people to think about that and try to, really align with the league if you're referencing the league. But if I'm just Michelle Whitty and I live in Woodbury and I'm upset about this or that and I want to share that out, and you're just, we're not out there looking at your Facebook pages, but we ask you to, again, really be thinking about that. They talk about it's okay to tag and call on politicians take action that aligns with our advocacy. But again, they're not saying candidates. This isn't candidates. This is politicians when we're advocating during the legislative session. We're talking to politicians all the time on social media. Do this, do that, but on these issues. All right, let's see here. So where is the line between being LWV leadership and an active member? And great question, and always the hardest one probably to answer. Although I would say, again, we do ask people who are in leadership positions to simply step back and say, is this going to compromise my, the role I play here to be nonpartisan if I take a role here or a position here? And so it often comes up with yard signs. That's the number one thing that people talk about: yard signs, being a part of a campaign, contributing to a campaign. And we often say things like, try to get your neighbor to host a lawn sign. If you really feel strongly about a candidate, have your neighbor host it. Do you need to host it? Have them host it. It's nice to think about, you want to try as best as you can during the candidate season, if you're an active league member, to practice nonpartisanship. If you aren't a leader, you're just a member, we realize not everyone is going to take that stance. We've got a lot of league members who I know are involved in campaigns, and that's okay. We ask leaders to do their best not to do that, especially if they're leading voter service, right? During the candidate forum, we've had a variety of people that one of the pieces of guidance we've given to several leagues this year is maybe they have a president or somebody in the league who's going to run for a partisan office or even a nonpartisan office. We say, just ask them to take a leave of absence during the candidate season. We know, especially like in greater Minnesota, it's hard to get leaders sometimes, right? And on your local league, and people like, well, if I tell people they can't do anything partisan, we're going to lose everybody. And so I say, well, if they can't, if there's certain things that people just feel they are compelled to do, ask them to take a leave of absence and still come back, and that should be something people understand. The same thing with making a contribution. If you make a contribution up to $100, no one knows. If you make it for $99, those are not reportable, right? So if you want to support candidates financially and you don't want that to tie back to you, then keep it under $99. Also, I've asked people that I know to make what I do personally is I have friends that I say, would you please make a donation to this candidate? I really care about this candidate, but it's not appropriate for me to make it. And that's worked every time. Every time I ask somebody, they're like, yeah, that's a great idea. Or will you host the lawn sign? Because I don't want to, it's not right for me to host the lawn sign. So there are some things like that where we can still honor our interests without compromising our nonpartisanship. That being said, I do know, again, it's not a hard line. It really is a flexible line, and it is rare. It's a very. I have been here a little over 5 years now, and I've never had a candidate or somebody call or come back and say, that league member over there, I saw them give a donation to a candidate. It's usually the more bigger visible things that we're talking about that can fall into question. So being political but not partisan on social media, it's not okay to respond to politicians directly on social media. Calling out a party as being good or bad, advocating for how people should vote on candidates, again, or retweeting or sharing a political party's post. Now, a couple things I'll say on this one. So when we're working on issues and we're tweeting about issues or, on social media, we say not to respond to politicians directly, meaning it's never really a great platform for a back and forth, right? So it gets you, it just isn't. But we also talk about not calling out a party as being good or bad. That is probably the hardest piece right now for all of us. For example, after the 2020 elections, we had 14 senators and Minnesota senators and representatives who wrote a letter to the Texas Attorney General and wanted to be part of the group that was trying to override the results of the election. And so we did call that action out. We called out the people by name. And part of it was because they were really asking to undermine the entire election. And so we felt it was necessary to do that, and to let people know who these people were. And it is part of the advocacy we do. We will say, please let Governor Walz know your position on this. Please let whoever it is. But if we call people out by name, we call them, even though they're all in that situation, there are 14 of them, they just happen to all be GOP. But we felt like we weren't going to say members of the Republican Party. We said, these are who the people are, and they happen to be GOP. We can't help what party they're in, but we do call out legislators all the time for their points of view. So it feels partisan because you're only calling out people in one party, but you're calling them out for an issue that is very clear to who the league is. So, and we backed it up, ours, it was very league centric, a 13-page letter with all these footnotes. But again, I feel really fine for all of us to call out people on the issues, and we can't help where the parties decide they're going to land their issues. So it's thinking about that from that perspective. Okay. Election season on social media. Recommendations are stickier during election season. So this is everything we've just been talking about. Again, you just want to make sure that we're not looking like we're favoring any particular candidate. We do have candidates who, one of the issues that came up is we have candidates who thank our local league for doing forums, or they'll thank a local league or the state league and say, thank you so much for hosting, and then they'll talk about a position they have. We talked about before, should we delete that? And we just don't. We don't delete it, but we don't respond to it either. So, so that's how we've handled that. All right. So here's some more good examples. Being political but not partisan on social media. Here is a little tweet retweeted, President Biden, where you're retweeting a politician, not a candidate. He's now not candidate Biden, whose tweet aligns with our advocacy. So here's President Biden. He's already elected. We can't sit idly by while democracy is in peril. Here in America, we need to protect the sacred right to vote and ensure we, the people, choose our leaders, the very foundation on which our democracy rests. We urgently need the For the People Act. Send it to my desk. This is a great example, and especially when it is legislation. It's legislation, we support it, we can retweet that advocacy regardless of which party, does. So then also calls on politicians to take action aligned with our advocacy. LWV talks a lot. They show that we're saying, call Joe Manchin and tell him this. That's okay, because we're advocating for a specific thing. But we don't want to call out a party. So it would be, they show there in their tweet where we're not saying, I like how they say from Arizona to Georgia, voters turn out, in record numbers to choose our lawmakers. Now lawmakers are trying to choose who votes. So we didn't say, the Republicans in Arizona, the Republicans in Georgia, right? So there's ways to state your points of view and elevate your points of view without being partisan. Nonpartisanship, again, on social media. When in doubt, act as if you are in the League of Women Voters. I mean, we love for everyone to think of themselves that way. We know that some people, there's just some of us, especially in local issues, there's a lot in the local level are nonpartisan. I get a lot of these questions because all of our, county, city, school board elections are technically nonpartisan, but more partisan groups are endorsing them. And so that's made a dicier place for people to respond. So again, when in doubt, if you can act with these filters on and how you want to be seen is really great. We're going to kind of go through, we're not going to focus so much on DEI in here because there's a lot to go on, but this is all in the slide deck. It's really good stuff about how we also use our DEI lens in a way of nonpartisanship. There is a lot here to think about. I will stop here at the DEI in practice and nonpartisanship. And I think a lot of these, I really like just some of these little questions, So Black Lives Matter is an example when we had certainly living here in Minnesota and after the murder of George Floyd and how we react and people feeling like these are partisan acts. I mean, to me, it's very clear, when you look at the organizations and what people are working on, you just align it to our issues and it seems really clear when you put it to the issues. But we really want to think about just how, again, how groups who are working on these issues, how they align with ours, how we're using our DEI lens with who we work with, how to emphasize, we talk about the inclusion aspect of DEI. And I think about this, there are some organizations from time to time that really I think Indivisible is the one that is our most challenging, does great work and very embedded in local communities, but there often will be door knocking for candidates or be in a partisan space. And while it's difficult and you want to be with some of these groups, we still want to keep that nonpartisanship alive. So, all right, we're getting to the end here and we'll open up for more questions, but working with elected officials in nonpartisan ways. So now the campaign's over. So now it's a little cleaner, right? But how do we remain nonpartisan now that the people have become elected officials? So it's okay to engage them in our advocacy, right? Press conferences, participate in panel discussions, like we want to, like we do our legislative interviews. We want to interview everybody. We want to be with them in their official capacity when they're not in a candidate capacity. If we're there for reasons of an issue we care about. Now, what I will say here is we have from time to time not participated in certain events where we knew it was only going to be one party centric. And part of it is figuring out, is our participation in this event as a state league are we gonna make any difference here? So there was a democracy rally day, for example, this last spring, led by Fair Vote, Minnesota, and we had Common Cause and Clean Elections. These are all groups we love and we work with. But they were going to have a democracy day to talk about democracy and all the bills but everyone who was going to be there, all the elected officials that were going to be there were going to be Democrats, and pretty much all the people coming were people in the space. We were really lobbying tightly on some issues where we had some Republican support, and we wanted to really not align ourselves along such a partisan line. We could have chosen to go to that, but we felt like, well, we know that our allies are there, the message is out, we're kind of preaching to the choir, and we want to keep ourselves more in these other conversations that might be more fruitful in bringing along the opposite party from what we think on a lot of issues with us. So we do make some decisions, even though they're not truly partisan. We do try to protect also our point of view, our perception of partisanship. So there's a difference, like there's true nonpartisanship when you're working with candidates and endorsing and opposing and supporting. But there's these fuzzier times where we do make decisions frequently not to appear to look partisan, even though the issues are things we care about. Now, that being said, I also chose to go. There was a rally in Anoka, LWVABC was a part of, around reproductive health. And it was, but there were no, and there was an elected official there, but it was, it was a really clear, we know the parties have pretty much aligned themselves for years on these issues. So we kind of pick and choose depending on, the holisticness of the, everything we're learning with that event. Okay, so remaining nonpartisan when engaged during election season. So we've talked about that. When it's not okay to focus your remarks on elected official, all these things, mention office filings, these are all kind of the nitty gritty around candidates that we've already talked about. Remaining nonpartisan, again, things to consider. So just going through this one last time here, is the event itself nonpartisan? A lot of things are nonpartisan, but only partisan. They end up being partisan because the other side doesn't show up. We can't always, we can't always affect that. But we want to think, what is the balance of everybody being invited? We have asked for certain events, like when we often will say, were the Republicans invited? If they're not invited, we don't go. And that has been one lens we use at the state level for deciding participation. We can't always, much like our forums and our empty chair policies, we can't always control who's going to say yes, but we do want to make sure we create an inclusive environment in some of these issues. So some of these, again, just going more on the coalitions and partnerships. Again, coalition partnership work, we can't do everything. We need each other. We function in coalitions all the time. And it is really difficult sometimes to make decisions because of where we're at in the political cycle. I would say we form these coalitions and partnerships, but what's been really nice at the state level is people really understand. They'll say, we understand, League, that your role right now is to really maintain that perception of nonpartisanship, even when it's, because of your candidate forums. And we understand that you want to stand down right now and not sponsor or be out front on an issue. So that's been really great. The last thing is just they kind of talk about litigation. I won't get into this, but we have used this a lot in some of the deciding on amicus briefs that we're going to be a part of. So here's, as we get to the end, this little kind of graph they did, which I really like. Are you supporting or opposing? Here's your yes, your no, and where you go. And this is really kind of fun. So this is a fun thing to share maybe in some of your newsletters. And these are some of those main points kind of re-emphasized. So that's a lot. I want to show you really quickly. Oops, let me get there. Again, a couple of other things on our website. Again, under League Admin and Member Resources, where you'll find the slideshow I just did. They also have one on DEI, which is really, really great and highly recommended. But also, if you go on our website and you go to, move my thing down here, to governance. And governance is where we put all of our policies, but also our guidance on important issues like that. So we have best practices for staying nonpartisan in advocacy and voter service. It's kind of the same information, but tilted around a little bit, depending on your how you're looking at it. And because we're in voter service, we'll open that one up here. But this is where these are really good specific things. So do encourage people to register to vote regardless of their any belief they hold, right? But do not suggest that your purpose is to register people who support a specific policy position. Example of a sign to avoid is vote for gun control, register here. And this is a really important piece to understand. And I often explain it as how we participated at the Students Demand Action rally when there was a big gun control rally here from moms and Students Demand Action after the Parkland shooting. We had some of the Parkland students here. We had people registering people to vote, walking around with clipboards and League aprons and stuff on. And those people were different from the people who were advocating. We also have people there who were advocating for our position on gun control and firearms, but they're different. So we just don't, it's always okay for us to register voters, any voter at any time for things, but we don't connect them voting with voting for an issue. And that can be a sticky wicket for people sometimes. So that's a good one to remember. Do engage potential voters on their interests and lives so they understand how elected officials impact their daily lives and the importance of issues. So we know that people don't vote because they don't know who the candidates were. They don't know where they stand on their issues. They don't think their vote matters. We want people to, get them thinking about that. But what you don't want to do is to say, well, here's the votes, the candidates you should vote for then that care about that, right? We have Vote 411 and we can tell people, go here, learn about the candidates. You don't want to say though, you should vote for politicians that support environmental protection. We don't make that connection when we're registering voters. We do not share LWV positions alongside candidate information. We have both, but we don't put them together. We do not suggest that people should vote for or against a candidate or party. And we'll end on the last one, which is probably the hardest piece, and we get a lot about. We also do not wear materials or use language that refers to parties or candidates in a non-neutral manner. So when we talk about candidate forums and we talk about any league work, this issue has come up before about what we can wear. And, who would think we'd have to talk about, having, dress codes for democracy. The bottom line is that, again, when you wear your league hat, you don't, you don't want to necessarily, you certainly don't want to have things that are for or against parties or candidates. What we do know, though, is at the voting site itself, the Supreme Court did rule very liberally on freedom of expression. They said, people want to wear "Don't Tread on Me" t-shirts, which is sort of a Tea Party signal. They can wear those t-shirts. They can't say vote for Karen Langshan, but they can say, we can wear other kinds of t-shirts. Now, it's certainly fine for us, however, as the league, as a private organization, to ask our volunteers and our people associated with us at official league sanctioned events to wear certain things. So all organizations, it's okay to say, we ask you to not wear, as a volunteer at our event, a t-shirt or a hat or something that in any way promotes candidates, opposes candidates, or promotes or stands up for any issues at a candidate event, because then you're putting your issue alongside candidates, and that can be misconstrued. So neutrality, while neutrality sometimes people seem like that's wimpy. And I'm like, that is the strength we need right now in our democracy, are people who are willing to say, I get it. Things are tough. Things are loud. Things are important. They're all true. And we can remain the adults in the room. We don't always have to share everything we feel on social media or in our yard. We can still be powerful people supporting democracy and supporting candidates while maintaining our nonpartisanship. That maintains our ability to continue to have candidate forums that are helping our voters make good decisions. And that is where we really shine. So I gave you all of 1 minute to ask any other questions. There's a lot there. I hope this is helpful and not overwhelming. I know it can feel overwhelming, but I wanted to give you a lot of practical examples of just how these things play out, and hopefully that helps. So any questions, any more questions, I should say? We've been kind of answering them throughout. Paul?
Yeah, and Michelle, just the one thing I would offer just from our voter service calls is we cannot cover every possible situation. You just like on this program, you will come up with things that, well, we hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
Or it's a little bit different. And so never hesitate to call me or Michelle or Laura, to get some help, get some other brains to think about it. And I find that we always come up with better solutions when we get some more heads involved in these things, with different perspectives and experience. So don't feel like you're on your own figuring these things out, and don't feel like it's a crisis where you have to decide in a nanosecond what your response is. Take a breath and think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And do call. Like he said, I've had people say, oh no, I made a donation to a candidate and now I was elected vice president of my local league. And I'm like, then that's what you say. I made a donation to a candidate before. I mean, it's not a big secret in a lot of places who we are, what we do. I mean, it's not going to, change the trajectory of anything. But I think of the other big word, I probably should put a metaphor for all these things together, but is transparency. I think transparency is the thing. If somebody is like, well, you, by memory, we saw you walking in so-and-so's float, or whatever. It's like, yes, and I made the decision not to participate in any candidate forums in my area or something. I mean, so the point is we have things we're doing, and you just want to, think through what your story is and be transparent about that with people. We're not trying to hide things or hide who we are either. So it's really having that kind of common sense conversation in our heads about what we're doing. Sound good? I see Alyssa Melby's on and works with a lot of students there at the college, and that my one big thing with young people in voting is not everything you think needs to be on social media. So if you can, there is power in, keeping it down, down on the down low a bit, folks, during the candidate season, which is tough for people, but. All right. Thank you, everybody. And we will send out this recording, another copy of the slides, and have fun being nonpartisan. Bye-bye.